Retired Australian Major General Mick is with me right now, closely following Russia's war against Ukraine from the very beginning. Thank you so much, General Ryan, for joining me. Welcome.
Thanks, Natalie. It's good to be with you again.
So Putin has unexpectedly claimed that the war in Ukraine is approaching its end. He also praised the United States, saying Washington is sincerely trying to help end the war, but added that this is mainly a matter between Russia and Ukraine. What is your take on everything on these statements?
Well, it was an interesting statement, but it's one designed to hide from the Russian people the enormous costs of this war and the very minor gains that the Russian military has eked out over the last 4 and a bit years. It's also a statement designed to pander to the Trump administration. Putin probably knows that he can't win this war on the battlefield, but he also understands that the Trump administration is his best chance for keeping what territory he has illegally occupied since 2022. So, I mean, this is a statement designed to cover up his failings in this war to the Russian people and to pander to Donald Trump in the hope that he continues to support Russia's war objectives.
Yeah, that's a good point. General Ryan, but what is an interesting change in Putin's language, right? Back in 2022, remember, he called the government in Kyiv criminals. He called them drug addicts. And now, in the recent days, we heard quite a different tone. He called Zelensky even Mr. Zelensky. You know, in authoritarian systems, language is never accidental. So could this be a Putin's way of preparing Russians for a possible step back and crawling back from the war, but without, openly admitting failure?
Well, I think Putin, if nothing else, is ultimately a pragmatist, and that he probably now understands that he has very little chance of achieving his political objectives on the battlefield, and he will have to engage at some point with realistic negotiations with the Ukrainian government. Russia has not done that yet, as we know. They've stuck with their maximalist objectives. So I think Putin is probably laying the groundwork for more serious negotiations about a sustainable peace deal compared to his approach to negotiations up until this point.
General Ryan, and the victory parade in Russia was quite humiliating for Russian dictator. There was almost no military equipment at the parade, and some of the equipment was shown separately on a separate video. Is this a sign that almost all real equipment in Russia is now needed to the front line?
Well, I think it's partially that. It's also partially a sign that, this is a country, Russia that is in decline. It doesn't have the military might that it once did. But it's also a military that's not willing to risk putting large amounts of its military equipment on a parade where it could be attacked by Ukraine. Now, I think the Ukrainian response to the ceasefire plea from Putin and the declaration from the president of Ukraine about not to attack Red Square during this time was a brilliant diplomatic and propaganda move from Ukraine. It showed the world who actually is in control in this world, and it showed the American administration that Putin doesn't have all the cards.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't have all the cards. Institute for the Study of War, they write that Putin used this Victory Day speech to present the war against Ukraine as this generation version of the Soviet fight in World War II. In other words, he's, trying to present this war as a sacred struggle and make Russians accept losses, mobilization, all the censorship and, a falling standard of living and huge military spending as a necessary sacrifice for this. But do you think that Putin managed to inspire Russians to keep fighting for years ahead with such a speech?
Well, I read the speech. It wasn't a very inspiring one. Victory Day, as you know, celebrates the victory over Nazi Germany. The real irony is that the current day Russia exhibits many of the traits of that Nazi Germany as an authoritarian state that preys on its neighbours, suppresses its own people, and either jails or murders large numbers of political opponents. So there was a lot of irony in the speech, but I don't think there was any inspiration in it.
Also, Ukraine's commander-in-chief Alexander Syrskyi says that Russia wants to produce more than 7 million FPV drones this year. Is this an impressive and dangerous number for you, or is it like something that Ukraine is capable of dealing with?
Well, both Russia and Ukraine have been stepping up drone production over the last 4 years. I mean, this year, Ukraine will produce a similar number, if not more than Russia. The real question is, how good are the drones and how good are the drone operators? And as we've seen in the last few months, the Ukrainian armed forces have been focusing on destroying drone supply depots, drone operations locations, drone launch locations, to have a big impact on the ability of the Russians to use drones to dominate the grey zone either side of the zero line. They've been reasonably successful at that, given that the Russians have actually lost ground over the last couple of months.
What is your take on the Ukrainian drone, a huge one, Vampire?
Well, it has a role to play. One of the things with long-range strike is you have to go a long way. You have to be able to carry a large warhead that does a lot of damage when it gets there, but it also has to be electronically hardened so it can't be jammed or brought down through other means on the way to its target. Vampire's the most capable latest version, but I have no doubt that there are many scientists in Ukraine working on a version after it.
Oh, wow. So, General Ryan, we had this 3-day ceasefire, and it was far from perfect. Yes, there were still hundreds of attacks and Russian strike drones reported along the front line, but Ukrainian cities were more or less quiet. Is there a chance that this silence between Ukraine and Russia could last longer?
Well, I'm not sure whether this ceasefire will be extended, but it does show that ceasefires are possible to be negotiated and that both sides are able, at least partially, to comply with them. Obviously, Ukraine complies with them far more than Russia does, but it shows that both sides are able to negotiate cessation of hostilities, and that's a positive sign as we lean into the next round of diplomatic negotiations.
And, you know, Ukraine, I was thinking that Ukraine has not received direct military support from the United States for almost a year now, yeah? And has this made Ukraine weaker, or paradoxically, has Washington made us stronger by forcing Ukraine not to rely more on itself, and on Europe, I would say?
Well, I think for the most part, it has made Ukraine stronger. Not only has it forced it to step up industrial production inside Ukraine, as well as sourcing weapons from Europe, it's also forced Ukraine to think harder and be even more clever with its soldiers and its technologies on the battlefield and long-range strike and a whole range of other military endeavours. There's an old saying that when the money runs out, we have to really start thinking. And the US cut-off in funding has really forced senior strategists to think much harder about theories of victory for this war. Unfortunately, though, there have been some downsides. Access to Patriot missiles and a few other exquisite weapons systems, which Ukraine relies on to defend its skies and protect its citizens, have been decreasing over the last year. And we've seen an increase in the death of Ukrainian citizens due to ballistic missiles because of that.
Yeah, General Ryan, in one of your recent essays, you wrote that Ukraine may be mastering 21st century warfare faster than Russia. And you argue that Ukraine is adapting quicker and striking deeper, building its own defense industry and forcing Russia to pay more for less territory. Is this the paradox right now we're having, that, you know, we're not having support from the United States, as you said, and, you know, more European in its defense strategy?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Certainly, more European support is extraordinarily welcome, not just military support, but the very significant 90 billion euro loan that's just been provided will certainly help Ukraine. I think there are many efforts that have been ongoing over years that have been coming to fruition in the last 6 to 12 months, whether it is things like drone interceptors or large-scale industrial production in Ukraine. So I think there are a whole lot of factors that are contributing to what we're seeing at the moment, which I think is heralding a turning of the corner for Ukraine's war strategy, and it's a turning of the corner which is bad for Russia and good for Ukraine, and a positive sign for peace negotiations for the Ukrainian people.
And by the way, actually, Ukraine just released an interesting movie, Kill House, which shows, I don't think that you saw it in Australia yet, but I think it will be there in a visible future. And actually, this movie shows to the world how drones have changed all the situation on the front line. Super interesting movie to watch. I'm not just, it's not advertising, it's just an interesting, I saw it and I'm in the movie, by the way, so yeah, but okay. General Ryan.
Well, there's actually a Ukrainian film festival where I live in Brisbane at the end of this month. So hopefully I'll be going along, and I hope that they might show that movie.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's a nice Kill House. That's a nice one to understand more how it works on the battlefield in the rescue situation. Very interesting. So, General Ryan, some Western strategists I was reading, they argue that the less the United States helps Ukraine militarily, the less real leverage Washington has over Ukraine in any negotiation process. So in other words, we may have less aid, but also more freedom to act in Ukraine. Do you agree with this?
I think in the broad that is true. I mean, as one Ukrainian senior military officer said to me, whoever plays the piano player gets to choose the tune. And if you are providing a lot of assistance to Ukraine, you probably get to have an influence in the peace negotiations. But I don't think America's influence will go down to zero. It will have some influence. It's still a very powerful nation. It still provides training and intelligence and other support to Ukraine. And it has linkages to both China and Russia, who are engaged in the war against Ukraine. So whilst the lack of aid might have slightly decreased American influence in the peace negotiations, I don't think we'll see a situation where it has no influence at all.
Right. And also, you know, European Council President Antonio Costa, he recently said that the European Union has the potential to negotiate with Russia on the future security architecture of Europe. And then Putin said something like that the Gerhard Schröder would be the best mediator. I don't know whether I'm spelling it right, if such talks really started. That's a former German chancellor. How do you read this? Is Moscow trying to bring back, you know, this old Europe, the Europe of gas deals, the one that happened with Schröder, compromises, comfortable conversation with the Kremlin?
Yeah, it's, I guess, up to the EU to decide who they have as their key negotiator, but I doubt very much it'd be a former German chancellor who's had close ties with Russia. The key is getting Europe into the room for negotiations. That hasn't particularly been the case yet, but given the recent US national defence strategy said defending and helping Ukraine is a European problem, America should support Europe being in the negotiating room. At the end of the day, Europe has a bigger dog in the fight with European security, and it should be in that room. Who they choose to represent them remains to be seen.
Yeah, and at the same time, Berlin is reviving efforts to buy American Tomahawk cruise missiles after this Pentagon scrapped plans to deploy a U.S. battalion equipped with these weapons to Germany, leaving a gap in Europe's deterrence, I would say, against Russia. How do you see this decision?
Yeah, it was probably unwelcome for Europe, but I mean, it hasn't cancelled the order. It's delayed the order. Tomahawk is an extraordinarily good long-range, semi-stealthy strike weapon, and we all want them. I mean, Australia's just bought hundreds of them, as has Japan. But at the end of the day, Europe also has a pretty vast array of other weapon systems, including many, many long-range strike aircraft and indigenous strike missiles, which should be able to cover the gap until the arrival of the Tomahawks.
And Donald Trump is going to China in the recent days. Who needs this visit more, Beijing or Washington?
Well, I think they both need it, but they both need it for different reasons. The summit, which is planned to take place 15 May in Beijing, will focus, I think, primarily on economic issues from a US perspective, but China will also want to reset the relationship, move beyond the tariffs and the harsh words over the last few years. Whether that's possible or not remains to be seen, given that the United States, in all its government documents from the Trump administration, sees China as its major competitor. China will not want to discuss issues like Taiwan. It will see that as a domestic issue. It's not. But there are still some differences in between what might be discussed and what might be the key outcomes in that summit.
And there is also an important debate in about China. I was reading New York Times columnist, and he was writing that China is becoming dangerously, overconfident, because many in Beijing believe that the United States is in decline, I would say. In your view, how dangerous is this perception? Could China just miscalculate, especially when it comes to Taiwan or the wider confrontation with the West?
Well, unfortunately, most wars throughout history have emerged from these kind of circumstances where one country has been overconfident about its chances. I mean, if you're underconfident, by definition, you're not going to start a war or strategic competition with someone. So it was a good piece. I enjoyed reading it myself. But it does set up an environment where China might miscalculate American will, American resources, American military capability, which is obviously still the most powerful in the world, particularly in the Western Pacific, if it decides at some point that a military invasion of Taiwan is necessary. That would be catastrophic and would be catastrophic for everyone in the world, not just in the region.
Thank you, General Ryan. Retired Australian Major General Mick Ryan was with me in the studio online. Thank you so much, and see you again next time.
Thanks, Natalie.